Let's begin with a word of prayer together. Loving God, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts, be strengthening and pleasing to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. There's a church I am connected to by a colleague of mine, and their goal was to establish a connection with a community in another part of the world, much like we have with our sister community in El Salvador of El Goral. And this church's quest was to develop a connection to a community in Africa, in the country of Ethiopia. And so a delegation from the church left to go explore this possibility. And they knew they were going into a difficult area. Language would be a little bit of a barrier, and economics would be significantly different from what they had experienced themselves in their own community. When they got off the plane, before they left the airport, one of the people that was there to greet them had communicated to them that you will see a high volume of poverty once you get outside the airport. And there'll be people that will come up to you asking for money, asking for resources, and it won't just be adults, there'll be a lot of kids, and you feel free to respond in whatever way you feel you want to respond, but I just want to prepare you. If you don't want to get things kind of taken out of your pockets, you might be careful of your pockets and things that are there, and so just give you a little warning before we leave the grounds of the airport. And this one gentleman who was a part of the group, was one of the members of the church, kind of thought, well, how bad can it be? I mean, these are just people, right? He got outside the boundary of the airport, getting close to where their van would be to take them. And his eyes looked out, and what he saw was a sea of humanity in need. And this rush of people came up to him, kind of just reaching up, little kids reaching up with arms up to help me. And they wouldn't say it in English, but essentially, help me, help me. And next thing he knew, he had felt a hand go into one of his pockets, and all the change and money in that left pocket was gone. And so as he was walking from the edge up toward the van, he started putting his hands over his pockets like this, trying to get to protect the other pocket of contents in the other pocket. And then he thought to himself, it's only a few dollars. What difference is a few dollars going to make? And so he took out the rest of what he had in his pocket and gave it to whoever was there close by. And his mind changed in that moment. He went from thinking, gosh, I need to protect everything I've got from everybody else around me. And he got to thinking, even if I had $1 million, I'm not sure how much of a dent I could put in the amount of need that was in this country and with these people. And I thought about that story in terms of this story in Matthew's gospel, the feeding of the 5,000. My sense is the disciples probably felt very much like that gentleman getting off the plane, stepping away from the airport, saw this sea of humanity in need, and not wondering how in the world are we going to do what Jesus just asked us to do. It's an impossible task in front of us. Now, one of the interesting things about the story in Matthew that I find kind of interesting is more times than not, Jesus gives an instruction to the disciples, and they may be a little reluctant, but they end up doing everything that Jesus asked them to do. But in this case, we have a little bit of a different story in Matthew as Jesus says, I need you to feed these people. And the disciples' response was, it ain't going to happen, Jesus. There is no way this is possible. We are not going to be able to manage this group of people with the limited resources that we have. And Jesus' response to their saying we can't do this is, well, even if you don't think we're going to do it, we're going to do it anyways. And one of the things I think that the disciples were wrestling with in that moment was the fear of not being able to do what they wanted to do. Warren Carter, who is a New Testament scholar, actually teaches at Phillips Theological Seminary in Tulsa, awesome New Testament scholar, says that the opposite of fear is generosity. And he sees that all throughout Scripture and sees that in the human life. When we are fearful about something, we typically hold things close to the vest. We are kind of hold on to the emergency situation, and we are less generous when we are fearful. When we have a spirit of fear, we typically look insulated. We look toward the inside rather than an exterior way. And Jesus, through this, he wasn't using individuals as a mechanisms of teaching. They were in the moment. Jesus was compassionate to those people that came, people that wanted to be heard, people that wanted an audience with Jesus, people that were looking for some meaning and purpose in their life. They were all gathered there, and Jesus had compassion on the crowd, and he was going to take care of those. In his midst, he wasn't going to go, well, we'll just send them home. They can eat when they get home. He didn't know what the circumstances of those people were, and he was going to make sure and care for them. And this was an opportunity for Jesus to partner with the disciples to do something significant. And yet Jesus gets this resistance to something. We're small, we have a small amount of food. This is not something we can do. I'm reminded of a retreat I once attended. And in the retreat, we were in a small group conversation. And in the small group conversation, we were supposed to share stories of significant things we had witnessed happen that we didn't expect to happen. And there was a gentleman in the group that was talking about his community. He lived in the panhandle of Texas and the north part of Texas. And he said he came from a community of about 8,000 people that lived in that small town. And with many small towns, not only in Texas, but around the country, the rural areas of the U.S., what you see is a decline in population. You see a decline in resources. You see all the young people move away to other places. And that town of 8,000 people was beginning to feel like we're at some point going to be a ghost town. And there was a sense that that town felt like they were just going to dissipate and go unnoticed. But he said, we had Gladys in our town. And with Gladys, something remarkable happened. And we were like, well, what did Gladys do? Well, Gladys went to 3 people in the community and said, come over to my house. I'm going to feed you biscuits and gravy. But if you come, you need to promise to do something for me. And they loved Gladys, so they showed up. They had this wonderful biscuits and gravy breakfast on a Saturday morning. When the breakfast was over, Gladys slid a piece of paper to each of her 3 friends and says, whatever's on that piece of paper, I need you to do that for me today. And one person flipped it over and said, it's such and such house, this window needs to be repaired. Another person, they grabbed their slip of paper. There's one fence post out at this person's house. Go repair or replace that fence post. And those 3 people had those tasks, and they appreciated the biscuits and gravy, and off they went to accomplish those 3 things in their community. And she said, before you leave, I want you to do something for me. I want you 3 to bring yourselves and one other person back next week, and there'll be plenty of biscuits and gravy for the 6 of you if you come back. Within 3 months, there was 80 people showing up at Gladys's house for biscuits and gravy, partly for the fellowship, but more importantly, they were curious about what the slip of paper would say that they would do for their community. This town of 8,000 started out with 1 person with an idea. Then it was 3 people that joined her. Then it was 6 people. And then it exponentially got bigger and bigger. In a town where people's head was down, thinking, we have no future in this community. People began to recognize one another, have conversations with one another, got to know one another in different ways. And even though the town may not have changed its size, that town was changed forever because of a woman that decided to have biscuits and gravy and be compassionate, kind to the people in the community that felt forgotten. Jesus was trying to eradicate the fear of, we can't do anything here. It's too big. It's too insurmountable. One of the things that Jesus does, he does it, and he kind of did things kind of in progressive parts. We can look at this one story of the feeding of the 5,000. We sometimes look at a scripture story and kind of isolate that story. We start to spread out that story over scripture. We start to notice that Jesus is kind of tricky with his teaching methods. He kind of does things over and over again until we humans kind of get it, and we kind of don't get it all the time. So in Matthew 14, as soon as the disciples said, all we have is 5 loaves and 2 fish, the first thing that Jesus does, he decides is to take, bless, break, and give the bread. And we don't really think too much about that. In Matthew 14, you got this food, we're going to take it, distribute it, get it out. But if we were to fast forward to the upper room experience, where Jesus was gathered with the disciples and the close friends and those that were close in that group that followed Jesus, they're in that upper room that ends up being the final meal Jesus shares with his closest friends. And they're in the midst of the Passover meal, and Jesus pauses in the Passover meal and then decides to break and do something different with the bread and wine at the table. You know what he does? He takes, he blesses, he breaks, and he gives. And twice he's done that. And then in Luke's gospel, toward the end of Luke's gospel, there's two individuals that are pretty sad because Jesus had been crucified. They're walking along the road and a stranger comes up to walk with them. And they said, "What are you guys talking about? How have you not heard what's happened in this city? Jesus was crucified and we thought he was the Messiah." And he goes on to tell the stranger all these things, not recognizing that's Jesus that's walking along with him. And they get to their town of Emmaus, and the stranger's about to walk on, and the two guys say, "Hey, come join us for dinner. It's late. Come join us and be a part of our dinner and have a place to sleep." He goes inside, and they gather around the table. And when the bread gets to the stranger, he takes, he blesses, he gives, or breaks and gives. So the same four verbs are in Matthew in the feeding of the 5,000. The same four verbs are in the upper room, and the same four verbs are in the Emmaus story. Jesus is offering a pattern that no matter the circumstances, we are to bless the very things we have, and then together we can do significant things with that blessing. Whatever it is, it can make an impact in the world around us. When fear captures hold of us, I think there's not enough for me, my household, my resources. We think there's not enough. And fear, the other thing that fear does, it isolates us. We feel alone in fear. And Jesus is all about forming community, forming connections with one another. He doesn't go out and do ministry on his own. He gathers disciples and followers and women to say, "I need you to do this ministry with me." And every time he's out doing ministry, he gathers more people together and gathers more people doing things. And before long, there's all these people doing all these things, celebrating the very thing that Jesus modeled, and that was simply compassion and giving people a voice and a presence of significance in their life. We've been talking about the theme of difference makers. How can I make a difference? And we can look at the world, and I can't do anything with this. And those that know me know that I'm a little bit over the top of positivity thinking. I'm a little energetic about that kind of stuff. And some people say, "Well, you're a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of person." I'm neither of those. I'm the glass overflowing person. And so I think everything's possible if we just come together and just do it. I mean, we don't have to think, "Well, what about this and what about this?" And we can come up with all kinds of strategies why something can't happen. I'm thinking of all the ways that it can happen if we bound together and connect ourselves to one another to accomplish all these things. This feeding of the 5,000 story to me is fascinating. I mentioned in my sermon promo for those that watch this, it's the only story other than the Holy Week, the final week of Jesus, the only story in Scripture that's in all four Gospels. There's something about this story that Jesus was trying to teach the disciples something significant. As much it was for the crowds and for them to feel a sense that they were heard and got a voice, more so than anything, the story was about teaching the very people Jesus was with what was possible within them if they did things together rather than to think individually about their lives. We can either walk around with our hands over our pockets, "No one's going to get my stuff," or we can gather at the table and wait for a slip of paper to come over to us and discern what is it we're going to do today that's going to help somebody out. My guess is I don't have to slip you a piece of paper at all. All you have to do is look in your neighborhood, look in your community, look in your workplace, look at all the circle of friends you have. There are needs galore that we gloss over because we're paying attention to our lives. Jesus was trying to to pull away the fog over the disciples' eyes to see more clearly the need that they could respond to together. Together we can do significant things. It's not, I can't do this. It's, we can accomplish this. We can respond to the needs around us. And they are plentiful and big. I don't have to go to Ethiopia to have hands reach up for assistance and help. And we discovered this last week. Our own county refused to vote for a shelter for homeless people. Entire county has a homelessness problem, and we just kick the can down the street. I mean, slips of paper are being shifted to us every day, and we either pick them up or we ignore them. Jesus gave the disciples an opportunity to look past their own inability to see what was possible and place it within them. He was giving them a chance of saying, instead of saying, I don't believe we can do this, he was trying to reverse that thinking, I can believe in this, I can do this, I can accomplish this. Our whole life we have little mental voices. Sometimes those little voices are kind and say, good job, Chris, you did an awesome job today. But more times than not, we have that defeatist voice of, you're no good, you can't accomplish this. How dare you even think of doing that? That's not going to make a difference at all. And we battle those inner voices all the time. And Jesus was there to remind the disciples is that you cast out the fear of the things you cannot do. But don't conquer fear with generosity alone. It happens together. I continually am surprised. And not in a surprise like, oh my gosh, I never thought this would happen, but continually surprised at the outpouring of love and grace that this congregation continues to show to people, both within the membership of the church and in the community around us. Of people that had no idea there was a safe place for them, a welcoming place for them. Had no idea you would go out and do this kind of thing in the community. And it's not about us saying, look at us. It's about forwarding on the very belief that Jesus instilled in the disciples is still to be instilled in us even today. So don't wait for me to give you your piece of paper. You already know what you need to do. Just don't do it alone.